Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are just going to give it 1 more minute as we put the presentation up. As we wait for 1 more minute, please feel free to tell us where you're joining us from the chat. Just gonna wait for some few seconds. Thank you. We can see we have participants from South Africa, Tanzania, Turkey, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, well represented. Nairobi, awesome. We have South Africa, Kenya, USA, Rwanda. Wow, this is awesome, and you are much welcome to, especially to all the participants who have joined us very early and late in the afternoon. And thank you too for the participant who was joining us during the lunch hour. So welcome to the Indigenous Youth and Intergenerational Wisdom Storytelling event. As you know, there is increasing recognition on the importance and the role of indigenous and local knowledge, especially when it comes to biodiversity and ecosystem conservation. However, this indigenous and local knowledge is at a threat of loss because of several factors. And as a result of this, indigenous youth are inheriting multiple responsibilities of not only protecting and preserving their traditional land, resources, and sacred sites, which is directly connected to their cultural identity, but also the responsibilities of restoring lost knowledge, languages, as well as sustainable biocultural practices. Given this essential role, as well as the multiple responsibilities of indigenous youth, especially of today's indigenous youth, this event was designed to provide a platform for the indigenous youth to highlight some voices as well as lessons learned, especially when it comes to the conservation of nature and sustainable use practices. Also, this event was inspired by recent released IPBES assessment. IPBES in full is Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And we're gonna hear a bit about it later on sustainable use of wild species, which is going to be also summarized for you later in the session. So welcome. My name is Joseph Karanja. If we could have the next slide. I'm the BaseNet Indigenous and Local Knowledge Project Officer at UNESCO Paris. I will be co-facilitating this session together with my colleague from the African Wildlife Foundation, Simangede Msweri. And this event has been organized by BaseNet, which is a UN consortium consisting of UNDP, UNEP WCMC, and UNESCO in collaboration with the African Wildlife Foundation. Please, if we could have the next slide, and thank you for keeping the messages in the chat, and we can see the diversity of the participants in this webinar. Before I proceed, I would like to introduce some housekeeping for this session. First, English, French, and Spanish interpretation are going to be provided. And if you could click on the world icon at the bottom of your screen and you select your preferred language, this will be super great. And if I could open the floor maybe to one interpreter to do the same, to indicate this in French and Spanish, this will be great. Will that be possible?
they are already interpreting. So that's
Yes.
great. Thanks.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. And through this session, your microphone is going to be muted to ensure good quality for all. Uh, but in case you'd like to speak, we invite you to raise your hand, and we are going to unmute you to intervene or ask question. We also highly encourage you, in case you'd like to ask any question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I believe is going to be somewhere in the middle on your far right, rather than posting the question in the chat, and you can use the chat platform for sending other messages and interacting with other participants. Also, to notify you that this event will be recorded, and in case you have any issues regarding this, please let us know. And in case of any technical hitch, we hope there will be none, please write a direct message to Sharice Odongo in the chat function. We should also use the Mentimeter throughout this workshop. And now I take this opportunity to invite you to sign in or log in to Mentimeter. Please go to www.menti.com and enter the code 97581112, or please follow the link attached in the chat. If you could have that link in the chat, and I'm just going to pause for a few seconds for the participant to join the Mentimeter. And if in case you prefer to join the Mentimeter also on your phone, you're welcome to do that. I would now like to give the floor to Kamar Rai from Nepal, who is part of the IPBES Indigenous and Local Knowledge Task Force, to grace this event with a prayer. Kamar, over to you.
Basamada Gopamada Sampalala Saparani Gopamada Basamada Saya pukul. Thank you very much. Wishing for success.
Thank you so much, Kamar, for setting the mood and blessing this event with such powerful prayer. I already feel my heart overwhelmed with passion and joy and the eagerness to listen to the indigenous stories. I will now briefly introduce the today's agenda. So next we're going to have the interactive session using Mentimeter. So please make sure you join through the Mentimeter. And then we are going to have an orientation session on the IPBES Sustainable Use Assessment that was released last month from my colleague Peter Bates. Thereafter, we are going to hear amazing and interesting stories from the 5 Indigenous youth across the globe, so look out for that. Then we shall have another interactive session for us to better understand each other's community. And thereafter, we are going to have a reflection from one of the elder from Ugeek Indigenous community in Kenya, Mr. Daniel Koboi. And then we are going to have interactive session in the Q&A session, a panel, and then eventually we are going to close the session with final reflection and the closing remarks. If we could have the next slide. I can see the time has really gone, so I'll just take maybe one question. And I wanted to know whether you could share with us what is your understanding of the term sustainable use? What does that mean to you? And if you could give us an example from your community, that would be highly appreciated. You can do this by raising your hand, and we are going to give you a platform to speak. Because of time, I'm only going to manage to take one example of, if you prefer to write in the Mentimeter, you could write in the Mentimeter as well. Just opening my Mentimeter, just in case we have some reflection. Or Alex, if you're able to share the Mentimeter. Okay, thank you. We have one example. We have fishing from our local river without overfishing. That is awesome. Use of resources in a way and at a rate that does not lead to the long-term degradation of the environment. This is great and very encouraging to hear. Please continue posting the same on the Mentimeter, and when you get time, we are going to read some of the messages. And I'm going to read the last message: use without depleting to ensure continued benefit across generation. This is awesome, and thank you so much. Please continue writing these messages on the chat, and if we get time, we are going to read some of them. Then if we could have the next slide, Alex. I will now give the floor to my colleague, Peter Bates, who is from IPBES Technical Support Unit on Indigenous and Local Knowledge here at UNESCO Paris, to introduce and share with us the recent IPBES assessment on sustainable use of wild species, particularly focusing on Indigenous and Local Knowledge component. Peter, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Joseph, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. The idea is that I'll just give a very, very brief presentation on the assessment, and that this can set us up for the discussions that we're going to have over the next hour and a half. Next slide, please. Excellent. So just to give some very brief background to IPBES, for those of you who might not know, IPBES is the intergovernmental platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services. It's an independent intergovernmental body which was established by member states in 2012. So it's still fairly new and still growing and developing. Currently it has 139 member countries, and that number keeps going up all the time as more countries sign on to be part of the organization. And the overall objective of IPBES is to strengthen the science policy interface for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity for long-term human well-being and sustainable development. So next slide, please. Great. And so then the Sustainable Use Assessment ran from 2018 to 2022. So as Joseph said, it was just accepted by the member states a month ago at the big plenary meeting where all the member states of IPBES meet. There were a whole team of people involved in producing the assessment. I won't read them out. They're all out here, but you can see there were 37 different countries represented. So it was really a global effort to assess the state of sustainable use. And the objectives of the assessment were to consider approaches that enhance the sustainable use of wild species, to strengthen practices, measures, capacities, and tools for their conservation, and to recognize, crucially, the inseparable unity of human and nature. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. And so IPBES recognized, and IPBES from its very inception has had a program of work on Indigenous and local knowledge, recognizing how important Indigenous peoples and local communities are for the conservation and sustainable use of nature. So this assessment had a particular focus as well on Indigenous and local knowledge. Methods included authors and contributing authors who were both holders of Indigenous and local knowledge. We're using this acronym ILK here to make the slides shorter. We had 3 ILK dialogue workshops with Indigenous peoples and local communities where they could share their knowledge, an online call for contributions, and also literature reviews on Indigenous and local knowledge. So looking at a lot of different materials, which included academic articles, but also community reports, videos, artworks, and other materials. Next slide, please. Great. And so now just to go over some of the main findings of the assessment, and to keep in mind that these are the findings that were accepted by the member states of IPBES. So the idea is they hold a lot of political weight now, so they can be used as tools for policymakers, but also Indigenous peoples and local communities who may want to use these when they're discussing with decision makers in their localities or in their countries. So sustainable use of wild species is essential to the well-being of many Indigenous peoples and local communities, and it's also essential to maintaining abundant, healthy populations of wild species. So that's what's crucially important here, is that it's this two-way relationship, and the use is actually sustaining wild species. And this diagram on the left is aiming to show that relationship. So in the center, we have abundant, healthy wild species. Then we have these white arrows, which are these interactions with communities, which are mediated by respect, reciprocity, and responsibility. And then the band around the outside with the photos aims to show all the different benefits to communities, which include well-being and health, language, arts, craft, and music, rituals and ceremonies, and plants as kins, totems, and spirits, and also food and medicines. And all of this is encapsulated by knowledge, community, identity, and crucially spirituality. So that's the aim of this figure, is to try to give a sense of the importance and of the interactions within this important concept. Next slide, please. To give an idea of the scale of this, the assessment also found that Indigenous peoples manage fishing, gathering, and terrestrial animal harvesting and other uses of wild species on more than 38 million kilometers squared of land in 87 countries. This is approximately 40% of terrestrial conserved areas, including many with high biodiversity. And also an estimated 15% of global forests are managed by IPLCs. So this starts to show the huge scale and why why Indigenous peoples and local communities are so important within these discussions. Next slide, please. Okay, however, the assessment also noted that there are multiple drivers that threaten the ability of Indigenous peoples and local communities to maintain and restore practices of sustainable use. These include government policies, loss of languages, education programs that don't include local cultural and environmental conditions, lack of attention to gendered roles, and in some cases, integration into monetized economic systems, which push communities into unavoidably overexploiting resources. Next slide. And then the assessment made some recommendations of what could be done, aimed at policymakers, but also at other actors within the system, which includes Indigenous peoples and local communities as change makers. So policies tailored to local social and ecological contexts, inclusive and participatory decision-making with multiple forms of knowledge included, recognition of rights, education programs that include ILK, and also that include time spent on the land learning in Indigenous ways. Research and monitoring processes co-produced with Indigenous peoples and local communities, approaches to support and revitalize Indigenous and local knowledge, and also customary governance, crucially, and support for Indigenous peoples and local communities to conduct their own research, monitoring, and customary governance to really enhance how this can be strengthened and governed from the ground up. So I'll stop there. I hope that gives kind of an overview of this important subject, and just really looking forward to hearing the stories from our other speakers. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that very comprehensive presentation. You already have a question in the Q&A tab, so I really encourage that you go and address that question. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are joining us. My name is Smangele Msweli. I come from South Africa, but I'm joining you from Kenya, where I work as the Senior Manager of the Youth Program at the African Wildlife Foundation, and I have the pleasure of being your co-moderator today. I am, of course, not the main speaker of the day, but I'm here joined by speakers who come from different continents, representing a lot of Indigenous communities. And this event is timely In August, we just celebrated the International Youth Day, but we also celebrated the International Day of the World's Indigenous People. So in this event, we will be learning from young people on what are they doing to conserve wild species and what is the role of the communities that they come from to that effect. Now, just a reminder, please make use of the chat box for comments, but if you have questions, make use of the Q&A tab. I won't be taking questions verbally for now, but we are going to have a Q&A session and our speakers will be able to start responding to those questions even before that session. Now, I would love to invite our new speaker, and that is Kim, who comes from Papua New Guinea and has experience in development and the conservation sector. He is currently the chairperson of the Commonwealth Youth Network, but is also a member of the Pacific Island Forum Secretary General's Young Climate Leaders Alliance. He is pursuing a Master's of Art in International Development in Japan. Kim, you can take the floor.
Thank you so much, Simon. May I please share my screen?
Yep, you are welcome.
All right, greetings, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen. You just need to go to presentation mode.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm humbled. Greetings, everyone across the world. My name from the Pacific region. My name is Kim Allen. I am from Papua New Guinea, a land of 1,000 tribes, over 800 language, and is the third largest rainforest in the world and hosts 6 to 7% of the world's biodiversity.
Kim, I'm so sorry to disturb you. Please put your presentation in presentation mode.
Can you see?
Yes, so just put it back up. Yeah. Yeah, and then at the bottom of the screen, you can, yeah. So just go, yes. Perfect.
Thank you so much. So I am from, apologies for the technical issues. I'm from Tube Island, an island in Papua New Guinea. What's my story? What brings me to this conservation space as a young indigenous leader in the Pacific? And of course, from Papua New Guinea. I grew up on Tube Island as a kid in the late mid-1990s. And growing up as an island kid, my parents, and I'm the firstborn of my parents, they sent me to my grandparents. I live with my grandparents to help them in every household chores. And growing up with my grandparents, usually I would help them in terms of gardening, fishing, cleaning around the house, and obeying literally everything that my grandparents say I would do, trying to impress them as their helper. And I grew up in the village on an island where education for me was on the environment, around the environment. I went to school under the trees, along the beach. So when there is rough seas or there's a bad weather during the rainy seasons, we would go home into our village or into our house. During the calm weather, we would sit beside the beach and have our teachers as elementary kids and primary school on the island. Over time, I didn't have access to higher primary on the island. I went afar to another island to get higher education. And in the course, in my pursuit for education, I left my home, my beautiful family, the comfort of my family, my grandparents, I left them, and I went to seek further education. But growing up as a child, I would follow my grandparents to the garden. And during the harvest period in Papua New Guinea and in the Pacific Islands, we would, during harvest time, the community would gather to harvest the garden. And my grandparents, I noticed few things she would say when you go to the garden. Excuse me. She would harvest the garden or dig the yams, the grounds, and she would preserve the soil. And you have to take care of the soil in order for the soil to give you the yieldings, the food that you want, the harvest that you want. And during where there are insects trying to attack the corns or the harvest that we have, she would say, you have to make fire instead of, we don't have pesticides, we don't have chemicals as fertilizers, so she would say, make fire, and the smoke from the fire will chase away the insects from the garden. And in that case, you don't need to use fertilizers, you don't need to use pesticides to chase away the insects. And she kept on teaching me, and when I go afar from the garden to cut the trees, she said, don't cut these trees. These are the trees that gives us shade during sunny weather. Now, in my island community of Tube and neighboring islands, there is a concept of Gwala. It's basically a traditional resource management. It's not conservation. It's a resource management where you preserve one particular area, either on land or alone in the marine. You preserve that area and it replenishes either in the marine to other areas around the community or on the island. If it's Kaskas or if it's the land biodiversity, they will replenish the whole area. So growing up, I have noticed these practices, especially going to the garden on the harvest period. And of course, when we harvest the yams, we distribute to the community or to the clan, the tribal group. Each one has distributed, of course, it's for communal good. So we distribute our harvest. My grandparents would do that. So I noticed the value of communal benefit. I noticed the value of hard work. At the same time, conservation or the acknowledging or appreciating the environment. I went, of course, over 10 years, I pursued education outside of my island communities, of my village. After 15 years, I came back and I noticed that the population has grown. There is more cutting down of trees, there is more harvesting on the marine resources. And I told the community, you know, we need to look back into our traditional resource management practices. That's when we revisited the Gwala. And the Gwala, of course, there was an NGO that was working with the community. So the community came together. This is my grandparents. And I owe this of my work to my grandparents. She is a keeper of traditional knowledge that has taught me when I was growing up. So mobilizing the youths, the first approach that I took was to raise awareness of our traditional knowledge among the young people on Tube Island and of course at various levels in Papua New Guinea. And the relationship seen in this message, in the relationship of young people and the environment, and acknowledging our traditional practices on Tube Island using Gwala, where we are growing up as kids, as young people on the island, acknowledging this the conservation methods that we have embedded in our practices. I went to Ware Primary School. I did my high school where I triggered most of my activism in conservation, where we planted literally the whole island, trees on the whole island. And that boosted my motivation, seeing the need for trees replanting. Of course, this leads at the community level, and it leads to policy advocacy at the national level, where I participate in various youth engagement activities, trying to inform government departments on what young people, the importance of conservation, importance of young people, because we are all interconnected. And all in all this, from my childhood with my youth engagement over time, I learned, and I am humbled to share this, that 3 reflections I want to leave in this conversation. Number 1, people are responsible custodians, and young people are at the center of it. And simply is that either we take away from the environment and at the same time we give back to the environment. What does giving back to the environment? It's what I learned from my grandparents: preserving the environment, looking after the environment. If it's the soil or the ocean, the land or the ocean, we have to look after it. We have to take care of it. Take only what's necessary for you. Because once you go over that, it becomes greed. Once you go over what's beyond what's necessary, where you go beyond what's beyond your family consumption, it becomes greed. You don't need that. In my community, we don't do that. We take only what's necessary for us as indigenous communities. Number two, be considerate of the environment and awareness of the society and other inhabitants. This basically means that there are environment, you dwell in the environment, just like the fish dwell in the sea. We as human beings, we dwell on the land. So if you are taking the fish, you consider the size. Basically, when you take below the size, edible, what's to eat, the children, the little ones, the fish and the little ones, you leave that. You only take what's size. So it's taking care, likewise for the trees. You cut only the good harvested trees for your tree, for your housing materials. Leave the ones to nurture the young ones to grow. So take only what's necessary for you, considerably of the environment. The third one is, and this is sharing of information, awareness. The third one is for integrated and sustainable solutions, acknowledging the traditional practices, acknowledging the lifestyle in the community. So here I have taken initiative to go back and help the community, where we identified water coming out from the stones and rocks. You know, water is an issue in island communities due to impacts of climate change affecting water salinity. So we were, of course, looking for tanks, water tanks, but there was water on the island, but it was coming out from the stones. How do you get that? And that's when you look into the community, we look into the environment, there are solutions in the environment, but how do you integrate that? So we built a dam, abstracted the water from the ground, and it supplied the whole community. And all in all, working with the elders, respecting their wise decisions, hearing their concerns. Of course, they live life ahead of us. So you can see we have a collective voice in the community, from women's group, youth groups, from every sector, from health, education. They're part of this growth at the community level. So we have worked together so far. We have implemented water projects, education projects in terms of building projects. Now we have ventured into building a sustainable library that has computers, and we are in the phase of the projects to capture traditional knowledge at the same time and teach it to the young students. All in all, thank you so much for your hearing. This is the Bird of Paradise, Papua New Guinea's national symbol.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, and especially those lessons from your grandparents that we take from away from the environment, but we also give back to the environment, and emphasizing that we need to be taking what we need and we leave the rest. I will now move on to our next speaker. We are moving to Africa, Kenya, who is Carson, who comes from the Endorois community in Kenya. He is the founder and executive director of Jamii Asilia Center. This is an organization that focuses on climate change, biodiversity, agropastorist, as well as the nexus with indigenous knowledge systems. He is studying law in Kenya at Kabarak University. Carson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Simonila. I hope you can hear me. I lost power and I'm using my phone, and I had to change where I was. Am I audible enough? And can you be able to see me?
Yes, I can see you. I can hear you perfectly. You can proceed.
Oh, thank you. So I'm not going to use slides. So if you could if you can highlight my video so that I can share my story live, like as you see me. Yeah. So as you quickly change that, as you remove the title that shows my name. I just wanted to say that I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much, Kamal, for the spiritual opening. Quite as well. Thank you, Joseph and Simangele for the excellent moderation. I could go back to the person who spoke before me, Kim. Your story touched me a lot because I can reminisce my childhood in the village when I studied as well under the tree when I was very young. I will, yeah, I think now this is better. You can see me way better than previously. So I will share my story based on a few ideas that we all share. I am indigenous of Endorois in Kenya, and I believe that I was born to uphold and preserve and transmit my people's knowledge systems for future generations. As we all of us here and everyone else, we owe our existence to Mother Earth as members of the humankind. So it's amazing that everyone that has spoken before me has shared incredible stories, encouraging all the way from moderators, and we have shared cross-cutting principles. It is amazing. It means that we all share the responsibility of sustainable use, irrespective of our ideals. But the most important thing is being part of the humankind and keeping this Mother Earth in safe hands. So based on a few years that I've worked on this earth with humility, because I am young and I'm not an elder, but I'm sharing the stories that I have heard from my people and what I have learned as well. So I'll tell you a story on ecological biodiversity and the life of a pastoralist. So for us, everything that exists under the sun, we have a way that we link everything. Let me put it this way. We live and identify almost every family with totems or symbols from the galaxy to flora and fauna. For instance, my mother's clan identifies with a crane, the bird, you know, and my father's clan identifies with the moon. And from my community, and especially from our biocultural protocol, even before the nexus with these conventional education systems, have always had ways of relating with environment or relating with nature sustainably. For instance, while growing up, the powerful law for my people was our people's creeds, especially in our relationship with nature collectively. And this is very important to mention that the laws that we have right now to conserve environment or even ways of worship looks down upon the African way of worship and calls it witchcraft, for instance, because growing up, we've always been conditioned to look down upon our ancestry, our sense of belonging. And the effects of westernization in faith, dress code, and education, we seem to have left the faith-based religious ethics that we have bioculturally envisaged since time immemorial. And those are the most important things right now. If you see even the young people, my generation, going down a little bit, we're always trying to dig deep and see what gives us pride in for instance, living, or even the names that we have, or the names of places, the names of a swamp, or the names of a hill, or the name of a cow, for instance. For me as a pastoralist, for instance, how people could, like, you cannot separate a bull from a man, for instance. Okay, so the story that I was about to tell you is about the totems. So the totems that I gave you, several other families or several other clans do have other ways of identifying with the totems and taking care of environment based on those creeds. Some of it I cannot tell you here because it's sacred, but for instance, there's wildlife that you cannot kill, or when they become wild, that specific clan has a specific way of handling that. And those are the ways that we've been told that we don't know how to do that. For instance, taking care of the lake. I come from a people that live near Lake Bogoria. And that brings me back to another way of conservation that we've been forced down. It's been imposed to us, like the Western type of conservation, for instance, the issue of fortress conservation or protected areas, being forced out of our land and being told that this is not the way to conserve environment. This is not the way to pray. You have to get out of this place and we show you how civilization is done, you know? But today, I'm really happy that we're celebrating Indigenous people's life ways and listening to even our early warning systems. Even the government nowadays see that. And so how people, and respectfully, I can pass the blame on the imperial money system, which has been sustained by neo-colonial systems, has exacerbated the consequences of leaving our ecological biodiversity as part of the destruction that we see. We burn charcoal, for instance. We cut down a 1,000-year-old tree just to get charcoal that will be sold and the money be used within 10 days, for instance. And so we need to support the methods that we have the indigenous knowledge that needs to be revitalized to enrich what's going on, what we have and what we learn in the Western science, and then bringing together with the indigenous science. And so I will leave there and say that I am impressed to be in this platform today, to be able to share with all of you and to listen to your questions and to listen to your ideas as well. I look forward to hearing more from fellow speakers. Thank you very much. I see that you have come back, Samangela. It looks like I've spoken too much. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
You had not spoken too much. I came back because you called me back. Thank you so much for those reflections, Carson, and for reminding us of the need to reconcile modern science and the systems that have always existed in Africa as well as in other areas. Now, the next speaker, who is going to be the last one in this set before I get to engage with you, is Sefa, who comes from the Philippines, where she is part of the Ibaloi Kankanai Igorot community. Now, she is currently in the steering committee as well as in the policy team of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, which is the official youth constituency in the Convention on Biological Diversity. Sefa is also the co-chair of Youth for Territories of Life, which is a youth group of ICCAs. Sefa, you can take the floor.
Thank you so much, Simangele. And thank you so much for the opportunity to join you and to learn from fellow Indigenous youth. It's really an honor. My name is Sefa. I'm an Ibaloi Kankanai Igorot from two Indigenous peoples from the mountains of the Cordillera here in northern Philippines. Gawis ay makigagay, takunda kayo idwani. I'm happy to be able to share stories with you today. I have a digital fire now behind me to set a bit of the setting today. I think this might be a very unconventional fire that we have set up on Zoom to tell stories, but I think it's a great tribute to a practice that I think many Indigenous peoples around the world have. And that is just kind of sitting together, singing, dancing, and telling stories. Indeed, these kinds of practices in the communities, whether they are by the fire or happening at weddings or at dinner tables, just coming together to share stories are the key way that Indigenous knowledge is passed down from generation to generation. In Kankanaay, we call this practice gagay, so gathering to tell stories. And this is when we learn about what happens in our ili or our community. I'm an Indigenous youth who grew up in the city. This is my city. My city, Baguio City, is our ancestral land. It's part of the ancestral lands of the Ibolay people, but it became urbanized. In any case, I think living in the city is becoming the case for more and more Indigenous youth for many reasons, relating to things like lack of education or jobs or social services, right? In many rural areas. So this is an unjust situation. Even as I grew up in the city though, the practice of gagay or coming together to tell stories is still one of the most important ways that I learn Indigenous values. For example, me and my family, many of us live apart, but we come together a few times a year. And when we do, we take the time to eat together and to set up a bonfire. Like this one, this is my dad, to sing and to tell stories. It's a practice that I look forward to every year. So I come from a family of Indigenous activists, many of whom have fought for Indigenous people's rights from when they were students. When we managed to gather around the fire, I can hear stories of my family's activism from before or until today. So many of them have stayed activists even now as senior citizens. Or we hear of the stories of our ancestors in their fight for our rights to our ancestral lands. Or we listen to the poems of my cousins who are writers. Or we just chat about our daily happenings and how we kind of navigate life. Around the fire, we also sing. It's me and my cousin. One of the songs that we've sung around the fire is a song written by my Auntie Judy that speaks beautifully about Indigenous wisdom. I wanted to take some minutes to share this song with you today. This video that I'm about to share is a video that we made for this song so that we could be able to share it with more people. It's called The Gift, which refers to the gift of Indigenous knowledge. So yeah, give me a minute.
Nurtured through the times to be a guiding light. The gift was handed down the ages from the elders to the child. I learned to love my land of birth, the mountains and the trees. I learned the secrets of the earth, the sky, the wind, the seas. It taught me when to work the land and when to watch and wait, when to sow and when to reap, and when to celebrate. To share my time, my skill, my harvest and my labor. I learned to give and to receive the caring of my neighbor. To give respect to nature, each creature has its space. To celebrate all cultures, each people has their ways. Walk lightly on the planet, this message must be heard. The gift of simple living we offer to the world. dreams to be a guiding light. And now it teaches me that I must carry on the fight.
So I'll continue my story now. So thank you for for listening to that song. Uh, it's yeah, as I said, it was written by my aunt, and I hope you liked it as much as I do. I think it really perfectly captures Indigenous wisdom and how it teaches us values of living in this world, but also of the role that Indigenous youth play in carrying on the fight for genuine recognition of our rights. This song and many others like it are songs that I've heard throughout my childhood. Now, honestly, growing up in the city as an Indigenous youth has difficulties. It's difficult to learn the language. It's hard to practice Indigenous practices that are learned hands-on. There is discrimination at school that we face, which pushes many Indigenous youth to deny their identities. At least for me personally, what happened is it really gave me, I guess you could say, an identity crisis, especially as I started getting into policy advocacy around 4 years ago. So I found myself working in these kinds of policy spaces, right? In these meeting rooms, a big part of what is asked of you by the space is to be a strong representative for Indigenous peoples and to bring Indigenous peoples to the forefront, because that's where these issues deserve to be. At first, I found this very difficult. Having grown up in the city, I don't know how else to say it, but I felt like sort of a fake Indigenous person, right? And so in order to be a proper advocate, I felt like I could only do that by telling other people's stories. I felt like my own experience of indigeneity was not really valid, or that it wasn't what these spaces needed, right? So in my first few years of policy advocacy, I was really mostly kind of pretending to be someone else. But there was a moment that this changed for me. So one day in 2019, for reasons that weren't very clear to me, I was asked to give a 10-minute speech about traditional knowledge and biodiversity to a very intimidating audience, much like this one, composed of government representatives to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. I was, and I still kind of am, a very shy person, so this talk was very, very terrifying to me. And so when I drafted this speech, I wrote it in the mindset that I was in at the time, which was to tell the stories only of Indigenous peoples that were not me, right? Because I felt that my stories were not valid. But on the night before I gave this speech, I had kind of an epiphany. I had the realization that I actually had my own stories to tell, and that being authentic would really help kind of carry the message across, right? And so right before I gave it the next day, I made big changes to what I was originally going to say. And so for this speech, I sat there and I told the stories of my community, of our ILI. I talked about the concept of our concept of community and how it doesn't separate people and nature. And at the end of that speech, so this is me here. At the end of that speech, in a very, very shaky voice, I sang The Gift, which is the song that you heard earlier. And it was one of my most kind of my breakthroughs in terms of advocacy. And some people who were there tell me that they still remember what I said that day. So it did kind of work in terms of impact, right? I didn't sing well at all. It was really kind of an embarrassing experience for me. But it was also the first time that I really realized in myself that I had my own stories that I could draw from, that I had indigenous values and knowledge of my own, that I could find my own voice and that I didn't have to pretend to have someone else's experience, right? As an advocate for indigenous peoples. I just wanted to share this story because I think it might be something that other indigenous youth might be struggling with. Even though some of our experiences might not be what people immediately associate with the term indigenous peoples, it is, valid. Today, I work quite actively in biodiversity policy advocacy. So here's me speaking. I'm a member of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, which is a very vibrant youth community active on biodiversity that brings youth voices to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Together, we're really trying to push for strong policies on biodiversity that respect human rights, and including indigenous people's rights. We're pushing for policies that listen to the priorities of young people, and that keep in mind future generations, and policies that address the roots of the crises that we're in, and kind of are pushing towards a fairer and more equitable world. At home, I work with Partners for Indigenous Knowledge Philippines, an NGO. And for the next years, we've also kind of set ourselves on a path to build and amplify the role that indigenous peoples play in leading conservation and guiding sustainable use on the ground in the Philippines. So just to end, I've learned a lot, and I wanted to share some of the reflections that I've had in this kind of path that I've taken briefly. So first of all, to point out that indigenous youth face many challenges. We face the erosion of our languages. Many are displaced from our ancestral lands, which is the source of our identity. We face discrimination and many others. These challenges need to be addressed because they compromise really the huge potential that indigenous youth have to be transformative leaders, because they really have it in them to address the challenges that we face in our communities, in our countries, and really even in leading global movements. This includes the fight against biodiversity loss and climate change. Second, I think a lot of indigenous knowledge is very much connected to the land that it comes from. And in many cases, you can't really take it out of its context. And that's the importance of ensuring that indigenous peoples have the security of their knowledge, yes, but also the security of their lands and their territories. These two go very much hand in hand, and these issues of land and knowledge cannot be separated from each other. And really, finally, my last point is I think that what the wider society can learn from indigenous peoples is how to see ourselves as part of nature, and how important it is to see the land as something that we have the responsibility of caring for and nurturing so that we can pass it on to the next generation and the next generation. This shouldn't just be a responsibility of indigenous peoples, but it should be our responsibility as humanity to the next generation. So yes, thank you so much for this opportunity to share these stories with you today. And I hope we can continue to create spaces for indigenous wisdom to be a guiding light in all our actions. Iyaman ko na kaya amin. Thank you very much. Back to you, Simangil.
Thank you so much, Sefa. One of the things I just took from you is that issues of land and knowledge cannot be separated, and that's very powerful. And it was great to hear of your experiences as an indigenous youth who actually grew up working in the city. You actually quite responded. There was a question that had came earlier on that was asking, what are some of the ways that indigenous knowledge is getting transferred? And I believe as part of your story, you clearly showed us those moments where elders sit with the youth around the fire and they tell the stories. but also you showed us music, which is one of the ways that this knowledge and the lessons and the values can get documented. Now, colleagues, you've heard from 3 of our youth speakers. There's still 2 more to go, but while we do that, I would love to learn a bit from you as well. I am very much aware that all of us come from communities, even if it's not Indigenous communities, and there are practices and values that we hold dear to our hearts. Now, for some of you who would love to share with us, I will actually open the floor for maximum 2 people. But for you to be able to get the floor, can I please ask you to respond to this question on Mentimeter? The team will be putting a link in the chat box right now, and please respond to this question. It's, what animal or plant is important and associated with your community, and why? Again, just like last time, you use the menti.com link that I'm actually just gonna share with you right now, and you put the code that appears in the chat box, but also in the screen. While you do that, I will actually share a bit. I said I come from South Africa, come from the kingdom of the Zulus. I believe our people are known to some extent. When I grew up, my family used to tell us that if we saw a snake in our yard, we were not supposed to kill it. You can chase it away or do anything, but you can't kill it, because they will say, which will mean in English, some of them, they are snakes of the ancestors. It is a sign that our ancestors are with us. Now, we all come from different communities and the stories. Maybe as you share your story, do write the country that you come from and then put the story. But thank you so much. That's amazing to see that leopards represent royalty in your culture. And Asian lion, yeah, it's an animal, a plant that is associated from your community. Now, the person who wrote the first comment that's in their culture, a leopard represents royalty. Please put your hand up, because I'm actually going to give you the floor right now, and you can share that very short story with us in 2 minutes. So Cherise, can I please ask you to, so was that whoever chose a leopard, I believe, Meline, that is you. So I am promoting you. Do accept the invites on your side, and you have 2 minutes to share a bit with us on this story. So yeah, you've got the floor, Meline. You can unmute yourself, Madeline. You've got the floor.
Thank you, Sma. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I actually found this information relatively recently from a book called The Big Five, An African Perspective. It is set in Nguni culture. I'm Ndebele and Nguni. And it was very standout to me that leopards are actually what we associate to kingship and royalty versus what the general global perspective of lions being royalty and the king. It is leopards because you don't just see a leopard. Leopards are solitary, they are very regal, they're very rare to see. And in the past, and I think also with some Nguni cultures still, the king wasn't somebody that you could just happen upon or see. Even as he moved, his delegation would be protecting him. And so the skins of leopards, that way leopards would be protected. So anything that had to do with leopards was only for royal people and people in royal ranks. And that way leopards were protected and conserved. So that's the most I can say, but this is from Nguni perspective, which are the Zulus, the Nguni complex in Southern Africa.
Thank you so much for those experiences. Now I'm going to move it to the marine side. I see there's a story shared on the titles. So if this is you who mentioned that a title is a totem for your community and that there is a story, please again put your hand up so that we can give you the floor and bring you to the panelist side. If a title is a totem, I see there's even a story on the Lion King, the lions and the kingdom. Please put your hand up if you had put a comment on the titles. Okay, I am not seeing your hand up for now, but we can always take it later. And thank you so much for everyone who shared their stories. And it is interesting and inspiring to know that all of us do have the stories that come from our community that are linked to nature and that are linked into the need to protect those speakers. Now, I know all of you are waiting for the Q&A section, and already a lot of questions are coming, and I encourage the speakers to start responding to them. But I do have two more speakers who will share their stories with us. Up next, I would love to invite Ati to take the floor. Now we have moved to recording. Thank you so much. So now we are moving to Colombia, inviting Ati, who comes from the Ahuaco community. She is a political scientist and is the advocacy coordinator at Climate Lab, but is also part of the coordination team of Unite for Climate Action. And Ati, you can take the floor, and we look forward to hearing your story.
Hola, hola. Para mí es un gusto estar aquí. Muchísimas gracias. Mi historia realmente comienza a la edad de 9 años y tiene que ver con la razón por la que se inspira el trabajo que eventualmente empecé a desarrollar. A la edad de 9 años llegó mi papá a la casa y nos arreglábamos porque debíamos salir pronto. Más tarde pasó un carro lleno de personas y entonces supe que nos encontraríamos más adelante y nos concentraríamos con un número de personas más grande que solamente los que íbamos en el carro. Al llegar había gente vestida de negro con grandes escudos transparentes. Yo recuerdo que estaban del otro lado y el escudo decía policía. En ese momento, sin entender mucho, solo veía que estábamos todos ahí concentrados y esa imagen parecía casi normal. Mi papá usaría el teléfono para comunicarse con una persona y solicitar cubrimiento de noticia de lo que estaba pasando. Después, un tiempo largo, no puedo recordar cuánto, empezó a haber forcejeo adelante y vi que un tío de parte de papá lanzaba cal, que es la concha de mar pulverizada, a la cara de un policía. En ese forcejeo mi mamá logró pasar, luego los demás emularon lo que ella hizo, nos llevaba a mi hermana y a mí agarradas de manos y con paso firme seguíamos adelante. Una vez empezó a pasar un grupo grande, empezaron a pasar los demás y así logramos entonces en una gran fila entrar al lugar. Los policías parecían enojados, así como las personas que vestían una camiseta con un logo y un jean. Lo que me hacía pensar que eran iguales en algún sentido. Hicimos una caminata de cerca de 2 horas, esa caminata era plana, pero el calor era implacable. Durante esa caminata los policías siguieron todo nuestro camino y lo que antes parecía un enfrentamiento, ahora parecían acompañar nuestro camino. De hecho, en esta segunda foto aparezco yo junto a mi mamá y un tío, pero éramos muchísimos más. En algún punto del camino había campesinos incluso haciendo la misma barrera para que nosotros no pasáramos y afirmaban que nunca se nos había visto proteger esa zona en específico. escuchaba gritos, empujones, pero seguimos adelante. Llegamos a una montaña descubierta sin vegetación y allí se ubicaron los mamos de todas las comunidades y gente con cámara empezó a documentar el suceso. Por la documentación que hizo mi tío Amado después y que yo vine a ver cuando ya era mayor, supe que estamos hablando del 19 de agosto del 2006 y el lugar del que hablábamos es la zona franca Puerto Brisas, ubicado en el departamento La Guajira, un puerto multipropósito orientado a manejar el comercio exterior y exportar oferta minera, agropecuaria y agroindustrial del norte del país. La denuncia era que se estaba afectando un humedal sagrado y la oposición decía que en ese punto no había punto sagrado y que el Ministerio de Ambiente en su momento ya había dado un aval para empezar la construcción de ese puerto multipropósito. Entonces, en ese momento supe que quería estudiar algo relacionado a política y que quería tomar mejor decisiones, que quería poder hablar y representar a la comunidad para poder llevar este mensaje y por qué era tan importante defender esos puntos sagrados. Y ahora se va a reproducir un video donde se documenta ese suceso.
La situación es la siguiente, que nosotros queremos que salga este puerto porque a mí me consta, yo tengo desde el año 63, la estaba habitando por acá y yo nunca he visto que esto ha sido sitio de pagaré de ellos. Nada de eso.
No, eso es mentira. Que hace como 2 días, ayer, anteayer, estaba bueno el paso y lo abrieron esta madrugada.
Kogian rian jajina jai arsayo jai kanko jai aza significa bunna nan keri latina nase bunti anu gwedan sinzo yakul.
Pero ¿quiénes son los culpables? Son los hermanos menores. Y entonces nosotros insistimos de que no nos siga dañando los sitios sagrados que existen a la orilla de la playa.
Pinajuna wus pinajuna resta aza jazik hayuzi Guacanusi, Znakin, Znakin, Dinosain Guanari. Awan Panakim, Kagam Sekin Tangueri, Kumabak, Sinugan and Guananan.
Haga permiso, haga permiso, haga permiso, haga
Yem Kagam Seri, Yan Pui, Zimpana Zapujina, Gravinatsi, Yem Kagam Se Canari Zinugan, Juna Nikari Kanjuna, Anu, Nazayanu, Kagam Zayanu, Sam Zayan, Gajina Vinicari, Ready Massa in Panaga Untunan, Atana, Yavikaji, Abina Yavikaji, Ready Zin Gaji, Akurinis in Ganaricasa.
Tenemos 2 resoluciones y varias certificaciones que nos certifican que aquí no existen zonas de pagamento, no existen comunidades indígenas, no existen negritudes. Esta reclamación es absurda.
Esto oculto puede hacer que eso todavía no había sol, no había ni estrellas, no había ni la tierra. Y ahora el mismo gobierno lo que están haciendo es violando. No vamos a quedar contentos de aquí si morimos 10.000 años todavía peleamos por eso.
Pues pronto la gente es malentendido como invasión. Pues yo creo que en la Tierra Nevada nunca hemos pensado invadir. Pero lo que sí es, hemos pensado, o vamos a seguir diciéndoles, cada uno tiene una visión diferente, cada uno tiene un desarrollo diferente y no queremos agredirle a nadie, tampoco nos agrida a nadie.
Retera gavis in pana, gavis in pana, gay toxic, maxi
You are muted, Ati, so you can unmute and continue.
Muchas gracias. En este corto video, entonces, vemos precisamente ese suceso que inspiró el trabajo que hoy hago. Hoy como activista de mi comunidad he dedicado esfuerzos en representarnos y cuando hablo de la representación, pienso que hay gran responsabilidad en ella. En la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, al norte de Colombia, viven 4 pueblos indígenas en esa zona llamada Línea Negra, que es el pueblo Cogi, Arhuaco, Huihu y Cancuamo. Yo estoy hablando desde el pueblo Arhuaco, y desde el pueblo Arhuaco empecé entonces esos caminos de representación. Hago parte de la plataforma de Unite for Climate como parte del equipo coordinador, siendo este un grupo de jóvenes de América Latina y el Caribe que trabajan alrededor de la crisis climática y permite espacios de creación de capacidades para participar en cumbres ambientales como la COP26, y hoy estamos preparándonos para asistir alrededor de 28 jóvenes a la COP27, lo que me ha permitido entender el amplio apoyo que viene generándose para grupos indígenas, pero también advertir una gran invisibilización hacia las problemáticas de los pueblos indígenas de la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. Me preocupa las barreras que tenemos en estos espacios para incidir desde una esfera internacional. Me preocupa los pocos esfuerzos que se hacen para romper estas barreras, como la consecución de traducción para lograr mayores involucramientos. Me preocupa la representación simbólica de la que podemos caer como pueblos indígenas sin generar en mayores efectos en los lugares que habitamos. Me da esperanza la movilización masiva de jóvenes frente a la crisis climática y me motiva el apoyo que damos y recibimos en estos movimientos. Me motiva la complejidad de discusiones que permiten estos círculos y el deseo de generar apuestas distintas. Frente a los líderes espirituales de las comunidades, en nuestra comunidad los llamamos mamo, estas figuras generan cohesión en ellas, permitiendo que los conocimientos culturales sean la columna vertebral de esta. Considero que parte de la generación de sentido que tiene lo que hago es la comprensión que tengo de la importancia que representa lo que hacemos en la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta como salvaguardas de ese lugar que llamamos corazón del mundo. Creo fielmente que nuestra representación debe respetar el lugar de nuestras autoridades tradicionales y respetar a las comunidades. Nos veo como puentes para lograr canalizar nuestra visión con los foráneos y generar aportes desde nuestras lecturas. Mis abuelos, mis padres fueron importantes líderes que aportaron a la comunidad desde la compra de tierras, desde la legalización jurídica de muchos de los predios que habitamos. Llevaron la voz de nuestro pueblo a diferentes escenarios y trabajaron por la educación. Incluso formaron una organización de la que hoy hacemos parte, que es el Cabildo Arhuaco Magdalena Guajira, que en su momento reunía las voces de los 4 pueblos y era el medio para negociar y establecer diálogos con el Estado y los gobiernos regionales, nacionales y locales. Creo que a la siguiente generación nos espera llegar a espacios de subrepresentación, acrecentar espacios autonómicos para proteger la casa común bajo nuestra jurisdicción. Y en la última foto muestro precisamente que parte de ese buscar autonomía, acrecentar espacios autonómicos, tiene que ver con la delimitación de nuestros territorios desde la lucha para que no haya traslape con otras figuras de protección ambiental como la de parques naturales. Es un ejemplo concreto para lograr autonomía en la Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ati, for sharing the story of your community with us, a story that inspired you to a path that you have taken. And I will reiterate your call to say you do think a lot still needs to be done to break the barriers that continue to limit the engagement of Indigenous youth in global processes. Now, I'm going to move to our last youth speaker, and we end our series by going to Panama. I would love to introduce Randy, who comes from and has worked for close to 15 years with the Gunayala people. Randy, you can take the floor.
Un gusto saludarles, hermanos y hermanas de América Latina y el mundo entero. El pueblo Kuna, por lo singular, somos muy poéticos. Nuestras historias, como muchas historias de los pueblos indígenas, se transmiten de manera oral. Así que quiero compartir con ustedes mi historia de la infancia dentro del territorio, donde abarca un Así comienza mi historia. Una noche antes de la puesta de la luna llena, Sabdur, un niño fuerte, le preguntó
Randy.
El abuelo, con una amplia sonrisa por la petición de su nieto, le contesta: entonces prepárate. Mañana, antes de que el abuelo Sol se asome, emprenderemos el viaje a las montañas y compartiré contigo, querido Sabdur, mis conocimientos. Con las llamaradas del fogón, Sabdur de un sobresalto se levanta de su hamaca. Muy Nabdili, abuela, ya preparaba el desayuno. Sus conocimientos culinarios impregnaban la pequeña casa. Jornada matutina que acompañaba con un canto tradicional, mientras el abuelo mascaba hacía cacao para fortalecerse aún más. Con la ayuda de un pequeño cayuco, Sabdur y el abuelo comienzan su viaje por la majestuosa mar, Mobilizing, contribuidora de los frutos marinos y donde habitan grandes arrecifes y manglares. Ya una vez en el bosque y todavía con el color oscuro de la madrugada, abuelo Orgun invita a Sabdur a darse un baño en el río. Sabdur, la corriente del río se detiene y siempre renueva su fuerza. Por eso es importante, antes de cada jornada laboral, renovar nuestra fuerza física a través de sus aguas. Sabdur y su abuelo, luego de compartir el baño en el río, emprenden su caminata por el bosque. Con un grito, Sabdur le indica a su abuelo la presencia de una gran serpiente y del susto tomó un garrote para matar el animal. El abuelo pide que se detenga. No, Sabdur, todos los animales de este bosque son tus hermanos. Nuestra existencia depende de la existencia de cada uno de ellos. Cada árbol, cada planta medicinal son parte de nuestra historia. Debemos por este motivo respetarlo y cuidarlo. Toda especie silvestre, como por ejemplo el tapir, le sirve de sustento a todas nuestras comunidades. Por eso tratamos que cada acción de nosotros sea en armonía y equilibrio con la madre tierra. Luego de esta primera enseñanza, llegan a un lugar donde el abuelo Orgun tenía sembrado cacao. Sabdur, para nosotros los Kunas, el cacao tiene un significado espiritual. Toma un par de semillas y come. Renovará tu fuerza física y más aún tu fuerza espiritual. En todas nuestras ceremonias espirituales nunca debe faltar el cacao. Todo botánico amplía su sabiduría gracias al olor del cacao. Es una semilla sagrada para el pueblo Kuna. Es importante igual que conozcas a dónde puedes sembrar y no sembrar. Por ejemplo, ¿ves estos grandes árboles? Es un lugar sagrado que tiene por nombre Naños, lugar sagrado. Es el lugar donde inicia la vida. Los animales cierto tiempo llegan a procrear y están las medicinas tradicionales. Por eso no se puede talar en ese lugar. Está prohibido tan siquiera caminar por esta tierra. Ustedes, los más jóvenes, deben tener esto siempre presente para que la vida siga su curso y no nos falte alimento. Gracias, abuelo. Ahora entiendo cómo nuestro pueblo ha conservado nuestros bosques por tantos años. Gracias a estos conocimientos, hoy en día podemos disfrutar de una soberanía y seguridad alimentaria dentro de nuestro territorio. Así es, querido nieto, ustedes los que en el futuro serán los guardianes de estos bosques deben aún ser más fuertes, seguir aprendiendo cada vez más por medio de relatos, cantos y danzas. Y más importante, llevar estos conocimientos a donde quiera que vayan. Nunca se olviden de sus conocimientos y saberes tradicionales. Y así de regreso a su hogar, Sabdur tenía más claro su misión en esta tierra y por nada del mundo podía sustituir los conocimientos de sus ancestros por otros conocimientos. Este es mi breve relato que habla sobre nuestros conocimientos tradicionales a través de lo que sería la historia de mi infancia. Mi abuelo fue un gran botánico conocedor de los tratados punas y por eso es importante el diálogo de generación, que la juventud hable con sus abuelos, que los abuelos hablen con los jóvenes, para que estos conocimientos se sigan conservando y practicando para el bien no solamente del territorio indígena, sino de todo lo que es el bien de la humanidad. Porque donde hay biodiversidad, donde existe un árbol, están los pueblos indígenas. Le agradezco, muchas gracias, y espero puedan ver un pequeño video de la danza cuna que estarán compartiendo con ustedes. Saludos.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for sharing that story of your community with us, and especially the practices from your grandfather. I must say, I haven't been to the Philippines, to Colombia, to Panama, and to Papua New Guinea, but with the stories shared here today, I'm really inspired, and thanks for sharing a piece of your community with us. I will soon be opening for question and answer session. But before I do that, I would love to invite Daniel, who comes from Kenya and is not a youth speaker, but does work a lot with youth, to share your reflections and your experiences, Daniel. You work in the space of, you come from an Indigenous community yourself, you work in the space of Indigenous knowledge transfer, fighting for the rights to land and so on. Now, before I open for a broader Q&A, I would love to give you the floor. Now, Daniel comes from Kenya, is part of the Ogiek community, and is the founder and the executive director of the Ogiek's People's Development Program. I would love to invite you to take the floor, Daniel.
Thanks, Mangele and Joseph. You cannot hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thanks. Yes, I can hear you, Daniel. You can continue.
Maybe the person who is sharing can stop sharing, please. Thank you. You can hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you. First, I am really impressed by the stories from the youths and from the BESNet. I could see the way the BESNet has really captured a lot of stories and I was really happy to listen from Seva, from Carlos, and many, many others. These are very interesting stories, and the future of every youth depend on what you do now at your age, because if you don't prepare your foundation to learn the culture at your age, you don't expect to learn in the near future. Then you will be in another level like some of us. But I will always say that some of us learn because we learn by observation. We were brought up, some of us from the village, like I do, and I underwent all the initiation ceremonies for which is required for any man in my community, from the Ogier community. And I learned a lot by seeing and doing. For instance, first thing you have to learn as a young person is the do's and don'ts of your community. For instance, when we grew up, when we were young, as youths and children, we were told that, you know, you cannot urinate on water on a walk in the street, because it is a folk that if you do that, your mother will be taken away by water. So that alone, you grew up knowing it is wrong for any person to pollute water, because in the downstream, somebody will be using. So this kind of do's and don'ts are things which you learn, book songs and all that. What I learned, and I'm happy when I heard about linking things which we are discussing are related to land, or they are environmental related, or rather is a complete ecosystem, or rather a complete biodiversity. When we grew, I learned how to prepare all the traps so that I could get an animal. That one you do it by doing yourself. Many a times, many people don't seem to do it themselves. They want to see others do, but they don't do it. So for us, first you learn the language. It is important to do things the right way. And another thing you learn is about blessings and curses. Many people in Africa, for instance, where we come from, we learn that it is a curse to do given things. It is wrong to kill, to do all this. It looks spiritual, but it's a very cultural. That's why many times when people discuss about Christianity or religion, Islamic and the rest, it doesn't mean that the traditional African way of doing things were not well set to protect humanity. We knew that there are things which you are not supposed to do, because otherwise, if you do them, you'll be cast. And you grew knowing that. You cannot go and remove honey from somebody's beehive without his or her permission. But in many cases, you know that if you do that and the owner comes and finds you have done them, there'll be some ceremonies to be performed against you and you will die, or something, a misfortune will happen to your family. All these are happening. As from my side, I'll always say that the intergenerational system is sometimes very difficult when there is urbanization. And I echo what Seva was saying, that grew up in the city, and some of our children, because personally I started the movement as early as 1994. Some of you are very young. And when the movement we started as young, very energetic people. We could do a lot of things. We even didn't know that you can get support elsewhere. We were doing it ourselves. And we grew up knowing. But you see, the young generation, first, they start losing the language. Language is key in storytelling. Because if you don't know the Ogiek language, how will you be able to get the stories of the Ogiek community? How will you be able to hear the folk songs when the people are doing? As in my organization, Ogiek People's Development Program, we started around 6 years ago. Every year we have a cultural event where people come and present cultural artifacts, the culture as a way of promoting the Ogiek language and culture for the young people to see for themselves. Currently, we have now started an Ogiek Cultural Center. The purpose is to be able to have a link between the young generation and the old so that they can learn, a place they can go and learn. When you want to know issues about Ogiek, we want to set up something like more or less like a museum where everybody would be able to know this is a motoget or something we use to carry honey. It belongs to the Ogiek community. This is a mabwaita, this is a place where we used to do blessings. What the purpose of honey? We use it for blessings. We use it also for honey wine. We use it also for many other things within the community. But now with the advancement of happening, the advantage for you young people at this generation is you can now document all that you learn from your grandparents, from your people. Because one great thing as an Ogiek community, I must know the clan of my mother. I must know the clan of my father. Reason being, so that there will be no intermarriages, because if you are from my clan, we cannot marry from the same clan. These are things which they are basic. But if you ask some young people, what is the name of your clan? What is your totem? They may not be able to remember, or they don't know. But if you get a chance to know one day, please write it down so that tomorrow, if you are asked, you can remember. And many other things which happen, because like now we are using the youth. They have written folk stories and they do competition writing in Ogiek language. And we are now going to the third version of writing. And the young people are writing in Ogiek language because we are seeing one of the greatest challenges is losing the language. Second, we have also started working with other organizations where we will be a learning place for the young and the old to transfer the knowledge on herbal medicine. Because we are seeing that it is being held by old people, but now when they die, who will be knowing this particular medicine is used for doing this and that? So that's what we are doing now. And it has encouraged a very strong, and also we have developed agroecological way of learning to use indigenous foods and how to grow them in some areas so that we don't lose this particular traditional knowledge. I know I might say a lot of stories, but I'm really impressed. And some of the greatest challenges we have had in issues of conservation. And we are happy that the youths are using it to protect biodiversity. They are now the one, we are having what we call Ogiek youths, and they are the one protecting the forest. It's not the old people who walk hundreds or thousands of kilometers around the forest, it's the youths. I see Semangele is looking at me directly, and I can say that all can be done. And the best thing is for you to learn by doing it. And the young people have been seeing, we have been meeting in these international meetings. I'm seeing them very, very active, and it really impressed me. And I hope you keep on doing, not only because you can get a chance to travel, but because you want to leave a mark in your communities and by ensuring that the traditions are welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And me looking at you didn't mean you should stop. I was just in affirmative with a lot of the things that you are saying. Recently, in one of the programs I am in, we had asked some of the young leaders to write similar content that they know, but in their home languages. It was so nice how a lot of them were like, I actually don't speak my home language a lot, or I know my home language, the written form, the spoken form of it, but not the written form of it. So what you are touching is really a reality, and we are happy to always have your guidance. Now, colleagues, we have time for questions. There are already questions that were in the chat box. So I think I will start with those questions first. I'll take 3 questions at the time, and then our speakers can choose which one they respond to. I see, Margaret, you are still on the call. There's a question that you asked quite a long time ago. So I will take these 3 people in this order. And please raise your hands if I call your name, and then Cherise will be able to migrate you so that you ask your question verbally. So Cherise, please start with Margaret, who comes from Kenya, and give her the floor. The second person is going to be, and I hope I'm calling this correctly, I believe we are from Cameroon. It's Macheh, M-A-C-E-H. And the last hand I am going to take is Rebecca Ellison. Now, all of these are because you had put your questions already in the Q&A. So I would love to give those 3 colleagues an opportunity to ask those questions. Margaret, you can take the floor.
Thank you, Simangele, for the opportunity to ask my question. I think it was answered by Richard, but okay, let me read it back again to you. Is that we are here sitting and listening to youths who have very inspiring stories, and I give them thumbs up for that. Quite emotional and inspiring storytelling, and a lot of lessons for us to learn. But we also need to be aware that, and I'm giving the case of Kenya, that in our local universities, the number of students coming in for environment-related courses, be it meteorology, geology, environmental science, the enrollment is going down, and we are really worried about this, since the youth is the face of the future. But then if they're not getting the skills at the levels required, because you realize that these presenters, they have some background knowledge of these environmental conservation aspects. So my question was, how do we keep having more youth engaged in this field? Because it appears most of them think there are no jobs. Most of them think it's held by people who've been there for a long time, not giving them a chance. And the mentorship is also going down, because we did a tracer survey together with colleagues from our Kenyan university. And they gave us a myriad of problems that they are facing. Not easy to find a job. There are many old guards sitting on various positions, not encouraging them. So how in this dialogue, let's be privy to this as well. And that's why I brought it up, and think about it and how can we address it. That's what I would like to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Back to you, Simangele.
Thank you so much, Margaret. So I will take questions at the same time, just 3 of them, so that the speakers can also respond at once. We can unmute Moche from Cameroon. You have the floor.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm called Mache Dolores. I'm from Cameroon. And my question goes to all the panelists, because I've noticed that they're all from indigenous groups. I want to know if in your community, you witness a situation where your traditional knowledge has been taken away, or let's say your indigenous knowledge has been taken away from any other person. And if that has been the case, what did you do? Or let's say, what did your community did to do to stop that? Or what was the measures you took? I'm asking this question because recently I'm a student a law student in Cameroon, and I'm doing research mostly on genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge. And most of the time I come across the issue of traditional knowledge of indigenous people and local community. But since we are here in the forum of indigenous people, I really want to know how you people protect practically your indigenous knowledge. So that's my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I scared that this session will be able to contribute a bit to your studies as well. Cousin, I see you were interested in taking up the first question. You can go. And then the next person, whoever will have to respond to the question of how you protect your indigenous knowledge, you can follow. Rebecca, you had a question, but you've not accepted my invite to take the floor. So I'm just going to read Rebecca's question so that colleagues, you consider all three questions at once. The question is, thank you for these insightful presentations. Can presenters describe their experience with building and maintaining consensus around these issues and decisions around sustainable practices? Carson, your hand is up first, so you can go. Yeah, Carson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sumangale, and thank you so much, our audience today. It is building the discussion. I just wanted to try Margaret's question, because I am in Kenya. I'm a Kenyan, and I see the problem. So the problem is, and my answer is not like one size fits all. And I'm not even a scientist, but I'll try giving, because of the few years that I've been around, I've been able to see the problems. One is that our curriculum or our educational system puts more focus on the money industry. The motivation when we're in school is to do good, pass exams, and be employed. What about our indigenous life-ways of which doesn't look at money? Of course, I know we need money, but if the focus is on monetary remuneration, then the root cause of the problem is from the curriculum, how the people are taught. It's not about the voluntarism. The students, or even the reason why so many young people are not going towards a certain field, say, for instance, what you've said, environment or science, is specifically because if you go to every household in Kenya, people would be like, why don't you take ICT? Why don't you do law? Because you will get more money, you will be employed. So let's go back and fuse our African indigenous life ways with the Western system, and we can be able to solve our own problems. Again, it doesn't also mean that everything entirely that we do means that everything that we get in school entirely will fix the problems that we have environmentally. Because and this is my point, I'm strongly opinionated on this. It doesn't mean that the Western science systems will solve our problems here. And so we are conflicted when we're graduating in these fields. Thank you so much, and back to you, Sumangale.
Thank you so much. Randy, your hand was up. I'll take you, and then followed by Sefa to give your responses.
Y responder la pregunta en cuanto al robo de conocimientos tradicionales. Esto es una situación que pasa en el territorio Kuna también. Llegan muchos universitarios, de repente científicos, que supuestamente vienen por un fin, pero al entrar al bosque ellos se llevan nuestros conocimientos tradicionales. ¿Qué hemos hecho como territorio Kuna o como pueblo Kuna? Es la creación o la elaboración de protocolos comunitarios. Esos protocolos se deben firmar por la persona que viene de visita, la cual le rige por leyes y que debe cumplir, porque es un protocolo que respeta las 49 comunidades del pueblo de la comarca. Está autorizada por el Congreso, que es nuestra máxima autoridad. Es un protocolo cultural que protege todo nuestro territorio y es importante tenerlo porque es una manera de hacerle frente a estos robos de conocimientos tradicionales por parte de gente que supuestamente viene de visita a nuestros territorios. Ha funcionado y está funcionando bastante bueno lo que es la creación de protocolos comunitarios. Solamente eso. Gracias.
Thank you so much. Stefa, I come to your side.
Thank you so much. I wanted to share a bit on the first question. I would just maybe wanted to share that from my standpoint, I work with a very vibrant and large youth community active on biodiversity. So I think it's not actually that we're not interested in these issues. I think many young people very much are, and we see the importance of this as this directly impacting us and our futures. I think they might not necessarily seek kind of academic training in conservation. And for me, I think that's okay because we need all kinds of people to conserve and sustainably use nature. We need people from all different kinds of fields, right? But I think if you pointed out a lot of the problems, and I think those need to be taken. A lot of the problems that the young people think is happening, and that's why they're not going to a certain field. And I think those should be taken seriously. For instance, if they feel like they're not being listened to, if they go into this kind of field, or if they feel that they are not able to make a living wage if they go into this field, then those are things that need to be addressed institutionally. Because I think it's understandable when young people kind of would like to or prefer to go to fields where they are places or institutions where they are listened to and taken seriously. And this is something that happens everywhere, where young people are not really seen as being able to contribute valuable insights to the discussions, not just in conservation, right? So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kim, I'll give you the floor. And after Kim, intentionally, Daniel, I would love you to address the question of how do we go about protecting Indigenous knowledge? Kim, you can take the floor for now.
Thank you so much. Just reiterating what my fellow panelists have mentioned, by the way, great questions, especially seeing what the potential of young people. On the first question, just to highlight what, in addition to what Carsten has said, two things: categorization of youths, whether they're in the formal sector, and that's basically education, or in the level of understanding that they have. Of course, the education frames it that way in terms of curriculum based. So if they are in the informal sector, it leads to the second point where their interest lies. And over time, I've noticed this, asking young people at the community level in our engagements where they want to suit, either in the conservation space or in other areas in terms of education, or even in technical skills. And everyone at the community level has a role to play, even whatever structured, and again, with respect to different systems or structures across wherever it is in country. But in Papua New Guinea and in other community from where I come from, in Tube, we identified, so there is a conservation, turtle conservation conflicts islands, turtle conservation operating in the island community. So we pick out, and there are over 10 island atolls as an island group of community. So we pick out one from each island as a network, and then we send them off to the conservation to help them in terms of training them to become more like youth advocates or custodians to come back and, of course, lessons learned, and to share ideas common that within the islands in each of these 10 islands, especially on methods of conservation, community engagement, and other skills that they learned during this program. Now, these other partners are involved, WWF are involved, other UN agencies, UNDP, USAID. So at the community level, everyone has a role to play. So in my role as a youth advocate, it's mostly to channel as a network to bring in people, and at the same time identifying skills and the potential of young people, what they want to bring out the best from them and putting them in those places. That's basically what I do, to bring out the best from young people, identify who is good at doing what and pushing them, or recognizing and recommending them to various roles. That's on question one. It's important, especially the statistics are very high in terms of youth unemployment across. In terms of protection of traditional, it's a really common one across, and I think PNG in the past and the other Pacific Islands, we share the same sentiments, especially where national laws don't protect these rights, land rights, or the rights or copyrights acts, and this either in symbols, in designs, in songs, it's cross-cutting, and that's where in such spaces, where in this kind of dialogues that such voices are heard, that this can be brought up for international copyrights to support countries, to support indigenous communities who don't have this kind of copyright acts, so that other international or even multinational companies don't exploit people, especially in their traditional knowledge, in their traditional designs, and to make commercialize these designs, because these are sacred. And it is an ongoing struggle for Papua New Guinea, even in Pacific Islanders, and I know it's an issue that is in the indigenous communities. So yeah, if such platforms provide that, it would be greatly appreciated to bring that discussions at these international forums where indigenous copyright acts are respected, either in research, either in science, either in music, wherever it is, they are to be protected. And in terms of sustainability solutions, this over time I've learned that community-driven sustainable practices are most important, because that's where sustainability is, and identifying solutions that are already there, like for example conservation of koala. It's basically a resource management conservation which was there. All you have to do is revive it, and at the same time, with the appreciation of the community, acknowledgement of the community, to spread it across to other island communities. And yeah, working with UNDP previously, we've tried to raise the profile and mainstream it across, and targeting the specific age group, which are young people, to be the drivers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have reached towards the end of our discussion, but I would still love you to come in, Daniel, because this is a very important question of research and indigenous knowledge. What are some of the ways that we can protect this knowledge? We want to share it, yes, but we don't want it to be misused and others to benefit from it without acknowledging where it came from. So over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much. I know time has just less. I think most of the speakers have spoken about bicultural protocols as one of the issues which is used to protect the knowledge. But our greatest challenge, or people who are giving us threats, are the academia and the researchers, because they are the one who will wish to publish in journals, all kinds of publications, without caring about the holders, the indigenous holders of traditional knowledge. But now we are developing what we call fair, pro-informed FPIC protocols, which we are trying to use it to ensure. So some organizations or groups in Latin America, indigenous peoples, have already started developing, especially the Quechua people, on the FPIC protocol, which will help in protecting our knowledge and whatever we have. And above all is also to really document, like folk songs, so that nobody else can take and patent or copyright them. So it is also above, it is also our responsibility as indigenous peoples to be able to patent or copyright whatever it is ours, so that nobody else can do it on our behalf. But at least now there are bylaws which communities have set, and so that it can protect what is theirs. I know this is a subject which is not very easy, because some of them want to have what we call access and benefit sharing from whatever knowledge which is ours. But some of them, well, we will have the benefit, but we may not protect what is ours. Maybe I can just make it short like that for now because of time, but it's a subject which we need all of us to know how we can protect what is ours as far as traditional knowledge is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and for everyone for joining us. I can see I'm getting a lot more private questions. Can I please ask you to send these via email, and we'll definitely share them with the speakers so that they respond in writing. Cherise will put my email address shortly in the chat box for those who still have questions remaining, as I may not be able to note all of them now. But from my side, as I mentioned, this has been very interesting, from learning about how Indigenous knowledge is contributing in conservation, both in the terrestrial ecosystems, but also in the aquatic ecosystems, and learning of the challenges that the young people face from Indigenous communities. And I think one of the key takeaways that will stay with me is how knowledge cannot be separated to the land, but also how our Indigenous languages are very important in ensuring that we continue to hold the very rich knowledge that comes with our communities and our cultures. Now, without wasting any more time, and of course, thank you so much for joining. I would love to take it back to my co-moderator who will close for us. So Robert, so Joseph, you have the floor, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much, Simangede, and thank you all for joining us today. I would like to start by appreciating our speakers for very interesting and inspiring stories that have really personally touched me. And many of you might agree with me that these stories have challenged us to learn from indigenous practices and teachings on how to coexist with nature. And particularly as we are thinking about future and sustainable development, especially in the current challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss, we have to draw on the inspiration of indigenous sustainable practices. And I think this has to become like our future lifestyle for us to be able to coexist with nature and to promote sustainable use. And thank you so much, our speakers, indigenous speakers, and the elder for those interesting stories and reflection. We highly appreciate your participation. I would also like to appreciate our interpreters who have made it possible for us to have this conversation in 3 languages so that we can, increase this intercommunity dialogue as well. And also like to appreciate our participants for listening and availing yourself for this event, and also for being very engaging in Mentimeter, in the Q&A, and also in the chat. We highly appreciate your participation, and we look forward to partnering with you in similar events and activities. I would also like to appreciate our colleague at the African Wildlife Foundation and my BestNet team in UNESCO, UNDP, and UNEP WCMC for your tremendous effort in organizing this event, and for providing backstopping and technical support. Thank you very much, and we highly appreciate your support. If we could have the next slide. As I earlier indicated, BestNet is a consortium partners of 3 UN agencies. If you'd like to learn more about BestNet, please, you could write to us. There are going to be some email shared in the chat. And please feel free to follow us on our social media platforms. My colleagues are going to drop the links on the chat. And we highly recommend that you consider subscribing to our BestNet monthly newsletter, monthly blast. This is a newsletter that we write on a monthly basis, and is a chance for you to to listen to what is coming and some of emerging issues regarding biodiversity and ecosystem assessment, and also to hear from the BESNET team as well as from the expert. Also, BESNET, we are committed particularly in promoting the inclusion of indigenous and local knowledge. And in the platform, for example, we provide a portal which has rich database, both on scientific, but also on the indigenous and local knowledge. And in case you'd like to subscribe as an expert, or you'd like to participate or contribute on indigenous and local knowledge, please get in touch with us and we can explain more on that. Next slide, please. Also, the African Wildlife Foundation, if we could have the next slide. Thank you. Also, the African Wildlife Foundation has a very rich youth database. And in case you'd like to join this database to understand on how you can join some of the event and the program, especially connected with youth, please write to our colleague Sharice Odongo through the email indicated on the poster, and I believe she has also actually shared that on the chat. And lastly, I would like to Peter introduce, if we could have the next slide, please. Peter introduced the IPBES assessment in a very short time, but they're organizing awareness webinar focusing on the two recent release website, one on the sustainable use of wild species that we focus partly on this event, and the other one on the value of nature. You are invited to participate in this webinar, which is going to be held on 30th August, and the registration link has been posted on the chat. And if you have more questions regarding the IPBES process on how to participate, you can get in touch with Peter Bates. And that's all from our side. And thank you very much for joining us. And we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Muchas gracias. Chao, chao.
Thank you all. Gracias.